Hello and welcome to this little explainer video on the MIDI for Trees beta config editor. I wrote this over the past few days to remove the need for you to have to edit the rather deep and complicated and complex configuration file that drives MIDI for Trees. So once you've launched it, you just press this button here and you can load the config file, which will be in the same directory as the application that I'll be shipping to you. And once you start it, you have these tabs along the top which let you see the different sections, which we'll look at in a second. And on the main page, this is where things start. So if you are wishing to use MIDI for Trees with a camera of some type, I have this panel here. If you click it, you can see the cameras that are available to your MacBook. And you can collapse that and you can choose camera type, and then here you can choose the camera that you wish to use. Otherwise, you can say I want to use a file, and then you provide the video file. I've shipped a default video for you all. You don't need to put the path in here, videos, you just take that away. It's just my tree video and it'll use that. Frame skip, you can skip every other frame if you wish to. This will help with the performance. But also just a little add-on that you can hover over the little question marks against most of the items. It'll tell you what to do. So these are quite self-explanatory. You can collapse these sections if you need to. Moving on, you have things for tree detection, and the way that MIDI for Trees works is that it's basically a color detector. So it'll use what's known as hue saturation value settings to find colors in your scene, and when it finds those colors, it draws boxes around them and then tracks them. So out of the box, I've given you a bunch of colors to use, and over the next few days I'm going to give you a little editor that lets you load up a scene from your video or from your camera, and you can draw boxes on the colors that you wish to track, and then it'll save those colors to the configuration file. Otherwise, you can just choose a color here, and you can see the upper and lower values that you want to look for. And these sliders let you change those values, and as I move them, you'll see in this color box here that they will change color. So in this case, I'm looking for colors between this green and this green, and I'm calling that color range dark green. You can call it whatever you want. I have a yellow green setting here. I have an autumn yellow, and you can also add your own color ranges as well. For now, I would just play with the ones that are there. On detection scales, so scales meaning how fine MIDI for Trees will look for detail, or rather how fine a detail it will look for. I typically just use what's called the micro scale. I switch that on, and this is the minimum area that it'll look for in pixels. Again, accept the defaults, and then you can play around with these settings to see if it makes any difference to your tracking. And then on the movement side of things, I personally recommend you don't really play with these too much. So yeah, we're going to leave those alone for now. I might do something about these in the future. You can change these. I've switched off the oscillation detection. That's not really going to be used. But optical flow could be useful. Again, the help panel sort of tells you some information about it, but there's work to be done here. On the display side of things, so this is the really important stuff, really. So when we say display, we really mean when we launch your video or we look at your camera, what do you want to see when you see the scene play before you? So the overlay is are things like the individual, what we call tree regions or color regions, and they'll appear as little boxes. We have movement vectors, which are basically the arrows which track the movement of those colored regions. And then we have the overall movement vector, which is this big arrow in the middle, which sums up all the movement of the tree as one overall movement vector. And that can be really useful for doing things like MIDI CC changes that might affect different sounds. And again, you can change the colors of the overlay. And again, you can play with these. So MIDI activity, I need to switch that off. That isn't even in there anymore. So I need to see what's going on with that one. But the overall movement arrow will be orange. The vector arrows for each individual color region will be white. And each tree region or each color region that it detects will be in green. So that's pretty, again, you can leave that alone if you so wish. And as far as the overall movement vector is concerned, that big arrow that sits in the middle, you can scale it. So when we say tree count, what we really mean is region count. So if there's lots and lots of regions that it's detected, you can have the overall movement arrow be amplified by the number of regions that it's found. You can set the threshold, so the lower that threshold, the more likely you'll get lots of movement in the overall movement vector. You can change its length, and you can make it move smoothly, or you can make it move jerkily around. And on the MIDI side, things get interesting. So we provide a piano overlay on top of your video or your video file, and you can orientate it vertically or horizontally. So this little preview shows you how the overlay will effectively appear on the screen. I've set it to be vertical, and I've set it to be split. So basically you get two keyboard overlays, one starting at the kind of like the upper end of the scale going down, and this is down going up in opposing directions. You can set the scale, you can set the keyboard to be horizontal as well. A little bit of work to be done here to make this bigger. And if I don't decide to split, it'll just be like one keyboard. In that way, you can change the opacity of the keyboard overlay as well, so it doesn't interfere too much with what you're looking at. Layout, I will describe these in my actual usage videos, but this is just for the settings. And you can change the scale. So I'm using E harmonic minor, but I can basically use maybe a blues scale. And now you see these are the notes that will be triggered by the MIDI For Trees app. You can set the drone note. Again, I'll explain all this in my my main tutorial videos. And you can also set the MIDI CC channel and values that are output by that big fat arrow in the middle. And onto the grid, you can switch on and off what's called a movement vector grid. Again, I'll explain that later in a different video, but you can switch that grid on and off. You can shuffle the notes on the grid every n note. So every time it plays 10 MIDI notes, it'll reshuffle the grid and put different notes in different places. You can assign the MIDI channel, how many notes can play at the same time, and how big the grid is, and you can change the opacity of the grid. And similarly, we have a thing called multi-zone movement. Again, I'll explain this in another one video, but you can split the screen into four zones, and each zone has its own overall movement vector, which is really useful for sending multiple MIDI CC based on the overall movement from different sections of your view. Yeah, I really wanted to go quite deep on the MIDI because I wanted to give composers and performers and musicians plenty of data that they can play with. You don't have to use any of these. You can just have MIDI For Trees trigger notes. But some people have expressed an interest in using it just to trigger CC. And they want to compose the music, but they want the movement of trees to affect the music. So I've given you lots of options, but I'll explain those in another section. And as for the advanced settings, you can leave all this on, really. If you're running a MacBook with Mac's Apple Silicon, you'll have there's kind of a GPU support that we build into that. I leave it on as auto anyway, and it'll detect what you've got. So that's the editor, really. It's really quite straightforward to launch and to use. I do encourage you to look at the rather big user guide that's been put together for this, and for you beta users, that'll be in the same folder as the application. And again, it's all work in progress. It's functionally working, and I need your feedback to sort of tell me which bits you don't like. And if any of this stuff confuses you, I'd love to know that, because I want to make it super usable for musicians and composers and anybody that really has a creative workflow that doesn't, like, you don't want to be interrupted by having to get too deep into the weeds, but I know some of you do. So it's finding that fine balance. Okay, I hope that helped. If you're on the beta program, I'll be sending out instructions fairly soon as to how to get this up and running. Okay, that's it for now. Ta-ta, and thank you.